The tension in the room was so thick, even the guards felt it. It was coronation day at Westminster Abbey. Thousands had gathered outside. Cameras from every corner of the world pointed toward the grand entrance. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and candle wax. The organ music swelled through the stone walls. Everyone wore their finest. Jewels caught the light. Silk rustled with every movement, but all eyes were on one woman. Princess Anne stood near the front row. Her uniform was crisp. Her posture was perfect. She had served the crown for decades. She had attended more royal events than most people could count. She knew every tradition, every rule, every gesture expected of her today. She would break one. Queen Camilla entered slowly. Her gown trailed behind her like a river of white and gold. The crown sat heavy on her head. She moved with careful steps, aware of every gaze. This was her moment, the moment she had waited years for. The moment that had once seemed impossible, but not everyone was celebrating. As Camilla passed, members of the royal family bowed. One by one, they lowered their heads. It was tradition. It was respect. It was expected. Even those who had known her as simply the other woman bent forward in acknowledgement. Princess Anne did not move. She stood tall. Her chin remained level, her eyes forward, not defiant, not angry, simply ... Still, the guards noticed first. They exchanged quick glances. Their training told them to stay focused, to ignore distractions, but this was no small thing. This was protocol being broken in plain sight. At the coronation, in front of the world, one guard shifted slightly. Another tightened his grip on his ceremonial sword. They had never seen anything like this. Not from Princess Anne, not from anyone. The cameras didn't catch it at first. They were focused on Camilla, on the crown, on the grand ceremony unfolding, but those who stood close enough saw everything. The moment stretched longer than it should have. Camilla's eyes flickered toward an IV, just a heartbeat. Then she continued forward. No words were spoken. None were needed. If you want to hear what happened next and why Princess Anne made this choice, make sure you're subscribed. This story goes deeper than you think. The whispers started immediately after the ceremony. In the hallways, in the carriages, behind closed doors. Did you see? She didn't bow, not even a nod. People tried to make sense of it. Some said it was a mistake. Others said it was deliberate. A statement, but those who knew Princess Anne understood. She never made mistakes. Not like that. The history between these two women ran deep, decades deep. It wasn't just about a title or a crown. It wasn't about jealousy or rivalry. It was about something far more personal. Something that had festered quietly for years while the world watched other dramas unfold. Princess Anne had been there through it all. She had watched her brother's first marriage crumble. She had seen the pain in Diana's eyes at family gatherings. She had witnessed the secret phone calls, the sneaking around, the lies that everyone pretended not to notice. She had held her tongue through countless dinners where Camilla sat at the table as if she belonged there all along, and now Camilla wore the crown. The same crown that should have been worn by someone else. Someone who had loved Charles with everything she had. Someone who had given the family to sons. Someone who had died in a tunnel in Paris while the world wept. Princess Anne had never forgotten. And today, she made sure Camilla knew it. The palace tried to control the narrative quickly. A momentary lapse, one spokesperson suggested. The princess was simply caught in the emotion of the day. But the footage told a different story. Anne's face showed no emotion. No tears, no distraction. Just calm, deliberate stillness. By evening, the video had spread. Social media exploded. Royal experts debated on television. Some praised Anne's quiet rebellion. Others called it disrespectful. But everyone agreed on one thing. Something had shifted in the royal family. And this was only the beginning. The palace staff worked through the night. Damage control. That's what they called it. Phones rang constantly. Emails poured in from journalists around the world. Everyone wanted a statement, an explanation, anything. But Princess Anne gave them nothing. She returned to her residence at Gatcombe Park as if nothing had happened. She checked on her horses. She reviewed her schedule for the coming week. She ate dinner alone in the kitchen, the way she preferred. No grand dining room. No staff hovering. Just her, a simple meal, and silence. Outside her gates, photographers waited. They had been there for hours, hoping for a glimpse, a reaction, something to feed the hungry news cycle. But Anne had dealt with press her entire life. She knew how to disappear in plain sight. Inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was different, tense. Camilla sat in her private study, still wearing her jewelry from the ceremony. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her teacup. She had expected resistance. She had prepared for judgment, but not this. Not from an eye. Charles paced near the window. His face was drawn, tired. This was supposed to be a day of triumph, a new chapter. Instead, it had become another scandal. Another headline. Another wound in a family that had bled publicly for decades. "She's made her point," Camilla said quietly. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her. She looked older suddenly, smaller. "It's not about you," Charles replied, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. "Anne has always been ... principled, stubborn." Camilla set down her cup. "She blames me. She always has." Charles didn't argue. He couldn't, because in some ways Anne did blame her. Not for loving him. Not even for the affair, really. But for the consequences. For the pain that rippled through their family. For the way Diana had suffered. For the way the monarchy itself had been damaged. Anne had been the one who held Diana when she cried at family gatherings. She had been the one who saw the bruises on Diana's spirit, if not her body. She had watched a vibrant young woman slowly break apart while everyone around her pretended not to notice, and through it all, Camilla had been there, in the shadows. Waiting the next morning, the newspapers were brutal. Photos of the moment plastered across front pages. Slow-motion videos analyzed frame by frame. Body language experts brought in to explain what the refusal to bow really meant. Some publications praised Anne's courage. Others condemned her breach of protocol. The public was divided. Diana's supporters rallied behind Anne. They saw it as justice, a small act of defiance against the woman who had, in their minds, destroyed a fairy tale. But others argued that it was time to move on, that holding on to old grudges served no one. Princess Anne read none of it. She had learned long ago that reading about yourself in the papers was a waste of time. They would write what they wanted regardless of the truth. Better to focus on the work, on duty, on the things that actually mattered. She had a hospital to visit that afternoon, a charity event in the evening, 16 engagements scheduled for the week, the same pace she had maintained for 50 years, the same dedication that had made her the hardest working royal in the family, year after year. But something was different now. People looked at her with new eyes. They saw not just the dutiful princess, but a woman with convictions, with boundaries, with a spine made of steel. At the hospital, a nurse approached her nervously. "Your Royal Highness," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What you did yesterday. My mom wanted me to tell you thank you. She never forgave what happened to Diana. None of us did." Anne's expression didn't change. She simply nodded once. "How long have you worked here?" she asked, redirecting the conversation. The nurse answered, and they continued the tour. Professional, efficient. But something had passed between them. An understanding. By the third day, the palace realized their strategy wasn't working. The story wouldn't die. If anything, it was growing. International coverage. Think pieces. Social media campaigns. People were choosing sides. Anne versus Camilla. Old wounds versus new beginnings. The past versus the future. A meeting was called. Senior royal aides gathered in a conference room deep inside the palace. The agenda was simple. Make this go away. But how? You couldn't force an apology from Princess Anne. She answered to no one except the king. And even then, only barely. She had her own household. Her own staff. her own way of doing things. "We could issue a joint statement," one aide suggested, "from both households, emphasizing unity." Another shook their head. "That makes it look worse. Like we're trying too hard. If we arrange a public appearance, the two of them together, show that there's no tension." Everyone in the room knew that wouldn't work. Anne would refuse, and forcing it would only create another spectacle. The truth was beginning to sink in. This wasn't something they could spin or manage or make disappear. Princess Anne had drawn a line, and she had done it in the most public way possible. Now the question was, what would she do next? The invitation arrived on heavy cream paper, gold embossed, formal, a state dinner at Buckingham Palace. 2 weeks away, all senior royals expected to attend, including Princess Anne. She held the envelope for a long moment before opening it. She knew what it was, what it meant. This was Charles's move. His way of forcing the issue, of bringing everyone together in a controlled environment where cameras would be limited and protocol would demand civility. Her private secretary stood nearby, waiting. "Will you attend, ma'am?" Anne set the invitation on her desk. "Of course," she said simply. "I've never missed a state dinner." But they both knew this one would be different. The palace buzzed with preparation. Menus were planned, seating arrangements debated, every detail scrutinized. Because this wasn't just a dinner, it was a test. A public measurement of whether the family could present a united front. Or if the cracks had grown too wide to hide, Camilla threw herself into the preparations. She reviewed flower arrangements. She approved the music selection. She personally checked the place settings. Keeping busy helped. It always did. It kept her mind from wandering to darker places. To the judgment she felt, to the woman who refused to acknowledge her as queen, she had never sought Anne's approval. Not really. They had always been different. Anne was born royal, raised with duty, drilled into her from childhood. She had never known anything else. Camilla had come from the outside. She had fought her way in. Paid prices Anne could never understand, but respect. That was different. That she had wanted. That she had hoped time would bring. Instead, she got silence. And worse, she got that moment at the coronation that would follow her forever. "She'd come around," Charles told her one evening. They sat in their private sitting room. Rain tapped against the windows. "Anne is practical above all else. She understands duty. She won't let personal feelings interfere indefinitely." Camilla wasn't so sure. She had seen the look in Anne's eyes, or rather the lack of look, the complete absence of anything. No anger, no sadness. Just nothing. That frightened her more than hostility ever could. Princess Anne, meanwhile, continued her work. She visited military bases. She attended charity galas. She opened new hospital wings. Her schedule never slowed. If anything, she increased her engagements, as if proving a point, as if showing that the real work of the monarchy continued regardless of ceremony or scandal. But at night, alone in her study, she thought about Diana. She remembered the young woman who had arrived at Balmoral that first summer. So full of hope, so eager to be part of the family. She remembered watching that hope slowly drain away, year after year, event after event. Anne had tried to help in her own way. Practical advice. Straightforward guidance. Keep your head down. Do your duty. Don't let them see you break. It was how Anne herself had survived. But Diana wasn't like her. Diana needed warmth, support, love. Things the royal family didn't know how to give. And through it all, Camilla had been there, in Charles's heart, if not always by his side. The real relationship, while Diana played the role of wife, Anne had watched it unfold with growing disgust. Not at the affair itself, she understood that marriages could be complicated, but at the lie. At the way Diana was expected to smile and wave while her marriage crumbled, while the woman her husband truly loved was welcomed into their circle the night before the state dinner. Anne's phone rang. It was her brother, Charles, he said, his voice careful. "Tomorrow evening. I hope we can put on a good show." "I always do," she replied. "You know what I mean?" This tension isn't helping anyone. The press is having a field day. The public is divided. Mother wouldn't have wanted this. Anne's grip tightened on the phone. Bringing up their mother was a low blow. The Queen had maintained perfect composure no matter what chaos swirled around her. She had welcomed Camilla eventually, publicly. She had done her duty. But she had also loved Diana, in her own distant way. Anne knew that. Everyone knew that. Mother did what she had to do, Anne said slowly. As do I. What does that mean? It means I'll be there tomorrow. I'll fulfill my obligations. But don't expect more than that, Charles sighed on the other end. She's my wife, Anne, the Queen. Whether you approve or not, that's the reality. I'm aware of reality, Charles. I've lived in it my entire life. Unlike some people who've spent decades pretending their actions have no consequences. No, the line went quiet. Then Charles spoke again, his voice harder now. Is this really about Diana? Or is it about something else? About the fact that I chose someone who makes me happy instead of suffering in silence like you think I should have. Anne didn't flinch. This is about respect. About duty. About the institution we're supposed to serve. You made your choice. You've gotten everything you wanted. Forgive me if I don't celebrate it with a bow. She hung up before he could respond. The palace was ablaze with light. Chandeliers glittered. Gold trim caught and reflected brightness from every surface. The staterooms had been polished until they shined. Fresh flowers perfumed the air. Everything was perfect. Everything was ready. Guests began to arrive. Foreign dignitaries. Government officials. Selected members of high society. They moved through receiving lines. They made small talk. They admired the setting. But everyone was waiting for the same thing. The arrival of the royal family. Together, in the same room. For the first time since the coronation, Princess Anne dressed carefully that evening. Her gown was elegant, but understated. Her jewelry minimal. She had no interest in competing with anyone. No need to make a statement through fashion. Her presence would be statement enough. As she prepared to leave, she caught a reflection in the mirror. For just a moment, she allowed herself to remember. All of it. The years of watching. The years of knowing. The funeral where she walked behind Diana's coffin while the world wept. The promises she had made to herself that day. Promises about never forgetting. Never pretending the past didn't matter. Tonight would test those promises. Tonight she would face Camilla not in a crowded abbey but in close quarters. At a dinner table where conversation was expected. Where ignoring someone would be impossible. Anne took a deep breath. Then she headed for the door. Whatever happened next, she would face it the way she faced everything. With dignity. With strength. And with the memory of a young woman who had deserved better. The car pulled through the palace gates just after 7. Security was tight. Protesters had gathered outside earlier in the day. Some supported Anne, others defended Camilla. The police kept them separated. Kept them at a distance. But their chants could still be heard echoing. Off the palace walls, Anne walked through the entrance with her usual stride. Confident. Unhurried. A palace aide greeted her and gestured toward the drawing room where pre-diner drinks were being served. She could hear voices. Laughter. The clink of crystal glasses. She paused at the threshold. Just for a heartbeat. Then she entered. The room fell quiet. Not completely, but enough. Conversations didn't stop, but they shifted. Eyes flickered toward her, then away, then back again. Everyone was watching without appearing to watch. Charles stood near the fireplace with several diplomats. He saw her immediately. Their eyes met across the room. A silent acknowledgement. Nothing more. Camilla stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She wore emerald green, the Queen's emeralds around her neck, a statement of her own. When she saw Anne, something crossed her face. Not quite fear, not quite anger, something more complicated. She whispered something to Charles. He nodded. They remained where they were, and accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server. She moved through the room with practiced ease. She spoke with a visiting ambassador. She complimented a duchess on her gown. She functioned perfectly. Years of training made it second nature, but she did not approach Charles and Camilla, and they did not approach her. The tension was invisible to those who didn't know. But those who did know, the family members, the senior aides, the palace insiders, they felt it like electricity in the air. Crackling, dangerous, waiting for a spark. Dinner was announced. Guests moved toward the state dining room. The table stretched impossibly long. White linens, gold cutlery, flowers arranged at precise intervals, place cards written in elegant script. Every seat assigned, every detail controlled. Anne found her seat. Not near the head of the table, not near Charles and Camilla, but not far enough away to suggest deliberate distancing. The palace had tried to be strategic. To avoid any visual that could be analyzed and dissected by the press, she sat. The chair beside her was filled by a foreign minister. A safe choice. Someone who would want to discuss policy, not family drama. Across from her sat a military general she knew well. More safe ground. Camilla and Charles took their seats at the center of the table. The position of honor. The king and queen presiding over their court. They looked regal, united, exactly as they were supposed to look. The first course arrived. Soup. Delicate. Perfect. Conversation flowed around the table. Anne participated when expected. She was charming when required. She knew how to navigate these events in her sleep, but every now and then her eyes would drift down the table, toward Camilla, and sometimes she would find Camilla looking back. Those moments never lasted. Both women would look away, but they happened, again and again. Like magnets unable to ignore each other's pull, halfway through the main course, Charles stood to make a toast. The room quieted. Glasses were raised. He spoke about friendship between nations, about duty, about the importance of unity in difficult times. His words were measured, diplomatic, but those who knew him could hear the double meaning. He wasn't just talking about international relations. To unity, he said, raising his glass. To moving forward while honoring the past. To building bridges instead of walls. Everyone drank. Everyone except Anne. She lifted her glass. She brought it to her lips, but she didn't drink. Just touched it to her mouth. A gesture that looked like participation. But WASN single quotes Camilla noticed. Anne saw her notice. Their eyes met again. Longer this time. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not understanding. Not forgiveness. But recognition. They both knew this couldn't continue forever. Something had to give. After dinner, guests moved to the music room for coffee and entertainment. A string quartet played Vivaldi. People mingled. The atmosphere relaxed slightly. The formal part of the evening was over. Now came the social dance. Anne stood near a window, looking out at the dark gardens. She could see her reflection in the glass. Behind her, the party continued. Laughter, music, the sound of people trying very hard to pretend everything was normal. She's not going away, you know. Anne turned. Her younger brother, Edward, stood beside her. His face was kind, concerned. He had always been the peacemaker, the one who tried to smooth over family conflicts. I'm aware, Anne replied. Then what's the end game here? You'll never speak to her? Never acknowledge her? For how many years? 5, 10, 20, for as long as necessary. Edward shook his head. That's not practical, Anne. We're a family. The world watches everything we do. These tensions hurt all of us. They hurt the monarchy itself. Anne turned to face him fully. Do you remember Diana's funeral? Edward's expression shifted. Of course. Do you remember the flowers? The cards? The millions of people who lined the streets? Do you remember the anger they felt? Not at Diana. At us. At what we had allowed to happen to her. It was different. Was it? She's gone, Edward. Dead in a tunnel because she was trying to escape photographers who wouldn't leave her alone. Photographers who were there because the world was obsessed with her, because her marriage had become a circus, because the man she married never loved her the way he loved someone else. Edward was quiet for a moment. You can't blame Camilla for the accident. I don't. I blame her for everything that led to it. I blame Charles. I blame the institution that allowed it to happen. I blame myself for not doing more. But I won't pretend it didn't matter. I won't bow to her and act like the past 25 years were acceptable. Someone needs to remember. Someone needs to hold the line. At what cost? Anne looked back at the window. At her reflection. At the woman she had become through decades of duty and discipline. At whatever cost necessary. Edward sighed. He touched her shoulder gently. You're one of the strongest people I know. But even strong people can be wrong. He walked away, leaving Anne alone by the window. She stood there for a long time, watching, thinking, feeling the weight of her choice. Across the room, Camilla watched her. She had been watching for most of the evening, trying to understand this woman who had become her silent adversary. Anne was nothing like Diana. Diana had been emotional, vulnerable. It's easy to read. Anne was stone, unbreakable, unmoved by pressure or persuasion. But even stone could crack, Camilla thought. Even stone could wear down with enough time. The question was, who would break first? The dinner ended near midnight. Guests departed with handshakes and air kisses. Diplomats praised the evening. Officials thanked their hosts. Cameras flashed as cars pulled away from the palace gates. On the surface, the night had been a success. But inside, the family knew better. Anne was one of the first to leave. She said her goodbyes to Charles with formal politeness. She nodded to Edward. She acknowledged other family members with appropriate warmth. But she did not say goodbye to Camilla, did not even look in her direction. She simply left. The drive home was silent. Her driver knew better than to attempt conversation. Anne stared out the window at London sliding past. Streetlights, empty sidewalks, the city sleeping, while her mind raced. She thought about Edward's words, about cost, about what this was taking from her, from the family, from the institution she had served her entire life. Was she being stubborn, petty, cruel? No, she dismissed the thought immediately. This wasn't about pettiness. This was about principle. It's about refusing to rewrite history just because time had passed. It's about standing for something when everyone else was ready to move on. But there was a part of her small, buried deep, that wondered if she was also punishing herself. If refusing to forgive Camilla was easier than facing her own guilt, her own failure to protect Diana when she had the chance, her own complicity in a system that chewed up and spit out anyone who didn't fit the mold, back at the palace. Camilla sat in her private study, still in her gown, still wearing the emeralds. Charles had gone to bed, exhausted by the evening, by the tension, by the impossible task of trying to hold together people who didn't want to be held. A soft knock on the door. Her private secretary entered, carrying a folder. The press coverage from this evening, Your Majesty. Camilla took it, flipped through the pages, photos of the dinner, articles already posted online, analysis of body language, comments about who spoke to whom, who stood near whom, who smiled and who didn't. And there, on the third page, a photo that made her stomach drop. And at the window, looking out at nothing. Her face captured in profile. The caption read, "Princess Anne's silent protest continues." Even when Anne wasn't doing anything, she was making a statement. That was her power, her weapon. Silence. Camilla closed the folder. Thank you. That's all for tonight. When she was alone again, she walked to her desk, opened a drawer, pulled out a letter she had written weeks ago but never sent. It was addressed to an... She had tried multiple drafts, some formal, some personal, some angry, some apologetic. None of them felt right. How do you write to someone who won't read what you send? How do you apologize for something you're not entirely sorry for? She had loved Charles. She still did. Is that really something that needed forgiveness? But she knew it wasn't that simple. It wasn't just about love. It was about choices, consequences. the ripple effects of their relationship that had touched so many lives. Diana's most of all. Camilla had never meant to hurt Diana. That was the truth. But intentions didn't erase damage. She knew that now. She had known it for years. Living with that knowledge was its own kind of punishment. She tore up the letter. Let the pieces fall into the wastebasket. Words wouldn't fix this. Words had never been her strength anyway. The next morning, Princess Anne woke early. She went riding before dawn. The fog hung low over the fields. Her horse's breath steamed in the cold air. The rhythm of hoofbeats steadied her. This was where she thought most clearly. Away from cameras, away from expectations. It's just her and the land and the simple clarity of movement. When she returned to the house, her secretary was waiting with the day's schedule. Another full day. A hospital visit. A regimental dinner. A charity board meeting. The work never stopped, and that was fine with her. The work was reliable. The work made sense. "Ma'am," her secretary said carefully, "there's been a request from Buckingham Palace. They'd like to arrange a meeting between you and the Queen, private, off the record." Anne removed her riding gloves slowly. "Did Charles ask for this?" "I believe it came from Her Majesty herself." That was interesting. Allah was reaching out. Trying to bridge the gap, it took courage to do that. Anne could acknowledge that, even if she didn't appreciate it. "What did you tell them?" "That I would present the request to you. They understand if the timing isn't right. They're willing to wait." Anne handed her gloves to a waiting staff member. "Tell them I'll consider it, but I make no promises." The secretary nodded and left. Anne stood in the hallway for a moment. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Dust motes danced in the beams. The house was quiet except for the distant sounds of staff going about their work. Meeting. Private. Just the two of them. No Charles mediating. No aides spinning. No cameras recording. Just two women trying to navigate an impossible situation. What would she even say? What was there to say that hadn't already been communicated through her silence? Oh, but maybe that was the point. Maybe Camilla wanted to hear it. Needed to hear it. All the things Anne had never spoken aloud. All the anger and disappointment and grief that she had carried for so many years. Would saying them out loud change anything? Would it ease the weight she carried? Anne didn't know. But the fact that she was even considering it was significant. The first crack in her armor. The first indication that her position might not be as unmovable as she had believed. That evening, she attended the regimental dinner. Military officers in dress uniform, old traditions honored. She gave a speech about service and sacrifice, about duty above personal interest, about the importance of maintaining standards even when it was difficult. As she spoke, she realized she was also talking to herself, reminding herself why she had made the choice she made, why she couldn't simply forgive and forget, just because it would be easier. But she also thought about something her mother had once told her. Years ago, during one of the many scandals that had rocked the family. "Sometimes, Anne," the Queen had said, "the hardest duty isn't standing firm. It's knowing when to bend." At the time, Anne had thought her mother was being weak, too willing to compromise, too concerned with appearances. But now, older herself, she began to understand. There was strength and flexibility, too. In choosing your battles, and recognizing when holding a line was helping and when it was just causing more pain. She finished her speech. The room applauded. Officers raised their glasses. She smiled and nodded and played her part. But inside something was shifting, a decision forming, not made yet, but close. When she got home that night, she sat at her desk, picked up a pen, wrote 2 words on a piece of paper. "I'll meet." She stared at those words for a long time, then she folded the paper, left it there. Tomorrow she would send her response. Tomorrow she would take the first step toward something she didn't fully understand yet. But tonight, she let herself sit with the uncertainty, with the uncomfortable feeling that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to hear what Camilla had to say. The meeting was arranged for a Tuesday afternoon. Clarence's house, not the palace. Somewhere more personal, more private. Just the two of them, No staff in the room. No security hovering. Just two women and 25 years of history between them, and arrived exactly on time. She had debated what to wear. Not too formal, not too casual. She settled on a simple suit, navy blue, professional. She wanted to convey that this wasn't a social call. This was business. Necessary business. A staff member greeted her at the door, led her through familiar hallways. She had been here before, many times, but never for this. Never for a conversation she both dreaded and needed. Camilla waited in a small sitting room. She stood when Anne entered. For a moment, neither spoke. They studied each other. Two women who had orbited the same family, the same institution, the same complicated history for decades, but had never truly confronted each other directly. "Thank you for coming," Camilla said finally. Her voice was quieter than expected, almost nervous. Anne nodded. She took the seat Camilla gestured toward. They sat across from each other. Tea had been prepared, but neither reached for it. "I wasn't sure you would," Camilla continued. I wasn't sure either." Silence. It stretched between them. Not comfortable. Not entirely hostile. Just heavy with everything unsaid. Camilla spoke first. "I want you to know that I never intended to hurt Diana. I know that probably doesn't matter to you. I know intentions aren't the same as actions. But it's the truth." Anne's expression didn't change. "You loved him while he was married to her. You continued your relationship while she was struggling. While she was lonely, while she was breaking. Those weren't intentions. Those were choices. Yes, they were." Camilla didn't flinch from the accusation. "I made choices. Charles made choices. Diana made choices too. It was never as simple as the story people tell." No one agreed. "It wasn't simple, but that doesn't make it right." Camilla leaned forward slightly. "What do you want from me, Anne? What would make this better? An apology? Regret? Shame? I've felt all of those things. For years, privately, where no one could see. Would it help if I said them out loud now?" Anne was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that surprised even herself. "I don't know." That honesty seemed to shift something in the room. Camilla sat back. Her shoulders dropped slightly. The tension eased a fraction. "I think," Anne continued slowly, "I've been angry for so long that I forgot why I started. Or maybe I never really knew. Because it's not just about you and Charles. It's about what happened to Diana. About the system that failed her. About the fact that I was part of that system and I couldn't protect her." "You tried," Camilla said softly. "I saw you try. You were one of the few who did. It wasn't enough. She's still dead. And you're still here, wearing the crown she should have worn, living the life she should have lived." Camilla's eyes glistened. But she didn't cry. "I never wanted her crown. I never wanted any of this. I just wanted Charles. That's all I ever wanted. And you got him. You got everything you wanted. Do you understand how that looks? How it feels to those of us who watched Diana suffer? I do. Believe me, I do. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about her, about what happened, about my part in it. I know I can never make that right. I know you'll probably never forgive me. But I need you to understand that I'm not a villain. I'm just a person who loved someone and made complicated choices in an impossible situation." Anne stared at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. Not as the other woman. Not as the symbol of everything that went wrong. But as Camilla, a woman in her 70s who had weathered decades of hatred and judgment, who had been called every cruel name imaginable, who had been blamed for things she did and things she didn't do, who had loved someone when that love was forbidden, and who had paid for that love every day since. "I can't forgive you," Anne said finally. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I can try to understand. That's the best I can offer." Camilla nodded slowly. "That's more than I expected. More than I deserve, probably. Don't mistake this for approval. Don't think I'm going to suddenly embrace you as family. But I also can't keep fighting a war that's already over. Diana's gone. Charles chose you. The coronation happened. These are facts. My silence, my refusal to acknowledge you, it doesn't change any of that. It just makes me tired. Then what happens now? Anne considered the question. Now we figure out how to exist in the same family without destroying each other, or destroying the institution we're both supposed to serve. I'll acknowledge you publicly. I'll fulfill my duties. But don't expect warmth. Don't expect friendship. Expect respect. Professional respect. That's what I can give. And the bowing? Anne's lips curved slightly. Almost a smile. I bow to the crown, not the person. You'll have to decide if that's enough. Camilla managed a small laugh. I suppose I will. They sat in silence again. But this time it was different. Not comfortable exactly, but less painful. Less sharp. Like a wound that had finally begun to heal, even if the scar would always remain. There's one more thing, Anne said as she prepared to leave. If we're going to do this coexist, you need to understand something. Diana will always matter. Her memory, her impact, her sons. I won't let people forget her just because time has passed. Just because it's uncomfortable. I want people to forget her, Camilla said quietly. She was important. She changed things. She changed the monarchy in ways we're still discovering. I may have loved Charles first, but she loved the people first. That matters. Anne studied her face, looking for dishonesty, for calculation, but all she saw was sincerity. It didn't erase the past. It didn't fix anything. But it was something. Then we understand each other, Anne said. She stood. Camilla stood too. They faced each other one more time, and extended her hand. Camilla took it. They shook. Formal, brief, but real. As Anne walked back to her car, she felt different. Not lighter exactly. The weight was still there, but it had shifted. Settled into a place where she could carry it better, the press would eventually notice the change. The slight thawing, the professional courtesy that replaced the cold silence. They would speculate about what happened, about what was said, but they would never know the truth. That would remain between Anne and Camilla. 3 months later, at another royal event, the cameras captured a moment. Anne and Camilla in the same frame. Anne nodded to her. Not a bow, but an acknowledgement. Camilla nodded back. And for just a second, something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not friendship, but recognition. Two women who had both loved and lost in different ways. Two women trying to navigate an impossible world. The guards noticed. They always noticed. But this time, what they saw wasn't tension. It was something more complicated, more human, more real than any fairy tale or scandal could ever be. And in a way, that was the true story. Not about villains or heroes. Not about right or wrong. But about people, complicated, flawed, trying their best in circumstances they never asked for. The crown would continue. The institution would survive. The work would go on, and Princess Anne and Queen Camilla would exist in the same family. Not as friends, not as enemies, but as two women who had finally, after all these years, found a way to share the same space without one of them disappearing. It wasn't the ending anyone expected, but maybe it was the ending they both needed.